This presentation is on global oil choke points, and it is by Andrew Fontenot, Nic Olin, Jamie Hamilton, Adam Kirschbaum, Jonathan Cortez, and Evan Eiermann. Over 80 million barrels of oil are produced per day. Half of this is shipped off to various nations by maritime trade routes which travel through choke points. Choke points are narrow channels or straits that serve as shortcuts to reduce shipping time and costs. The most important choke points that we will discuss are the Straits of Hormuz, the Malacca Straits, the Suez Canal and Suez Pipeline, Bab el-Mandab, the Turkish Straits, the Panama Canal, and the Danish Straits. The important factors of oil choke points that we will discuss include environmental concerns and alternate routes, limitations and threats to choke points, government involvement, the future of oil choke points, and their economic implications.
There are many environmental concerns that affect the global choke points, and there are several alternate routes at each global choke point.
Hormuz has three major alternatives: the Iraq pipeline, which runs from the north of Iraq to a Turkish port in the Mediterranean Sea, Petroleum in Saudi Arabia that can carry 4.8 million barrels per day, and last, the United Arab Emirates has a pipeline which can carry oil from Hisham to the Gulf of Oman. Malacca's alternative routes are other straits in the Indonesian archipelago. The Lombok Strait would take a significantly longer amount of time, and the Sunda Strait would also take a longer amount of time, but is also much harder to navigate. The Suez Canal already has a highly used alternative, the Suez Pipeline. This pipeline also enables very large crude carriers to lighten their load. Otherwise, full VLCCs cannot get through because the canal is too shallow. If both the Suez Canal and the Suez Pipeline were closed, the closest alternative would be to travel around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. The Turkish Straits are extremely difficult to navigate from being narrow and rather shallow. It is also one of the busiest straits and thus susceptible to disasters. These occurrences have spilled so much oil Turkey wants to impose regulations on the straits in order to protect their lands from pollution.
Choke points expose tankers to many of the dangers associated with oil transportation. Heavy traffic due to narrow waterways make it difficult to navigate large tankers. Some choke points, such as the Suez Canal, are too narrow for ultra-large crude carriers to pass through. Pirates are a serious threat to tankers. As you can see from the picture, where black dots represent pirate attacks, they are most active near the Bab el-Mandeb and Strait of Hormuz. Concerns of another terrorist attack have risen since the bombing of the Limburg. Terrorists rammed a small boat packed with explosives into the side of a tanker off the coast of Yemen. Wildfires on the island of Sumatra can make the Strait of Malacca impossible to navigate due to low visibility.
National governments around the world constantly have to adjust laws, regulations, and future projects to adapt to the modern world oil transportation routes. The Panama Canal is too narrow for larger oil transporters to pass, only being 110 feet wide at its narrowest point. Currently, the largest vessel able to pass through the canal is a Panamax-sized vessel. To improve their economy, Panama started a $5 billion project to expand the canal in 2007. Expected to be finished in 2014, the new canal will be able to transport more oil to and from the U.S. as well as coal and liquefied natural gas. On the other side of the world, the Strait of Hormuz, the most important choke point, was threatened to be shut down by the Iranian government because of threats against their nuclear ambitions. Since Hormuz relays one-third of the world's oil, shutting down the strait would cause oil prices to rise globally. The United States is an aircraft carrier protecting oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz because they are a huge consumer, but with the recent discovery of oil in North America, questions have risen to withdraw those aircraft carriers. Studies have been done to show that even with this recent find of oil in North America, removing U.S. ties to Middle Eastern oil would hurt the U.S. economy. The Suez Canal, controlled mostly by Egypt, must stay open regardless of how corrupt the government might be. The Egyptian military makes sure to keep access to the strait available due to their North African neighbors who depend on those trade routes. If the Suez Canal were to close, longer alternate routes would have to be taken and congestion would become an issue. Farther east, the Strait of Malacca, run by the littoral states of Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia, is experiencing an increase in oil transport, which means increased traffic and increased danger. The littoral states are working together to form laws and regulations to keep the Strait of Malacca safe and secure and devoid of disaster. Any type of huge collision or disaster in the strait could drastically affect the economies of Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia.
Most aspects of the global oil industry are almost entirely unpredictable. One of the only things certain about the future of global oil choke points is that maritime traffic will continue to increase. As seen in the below graphic, global demand for oil and oil flow through global choke points will continue to increase. The Malacca Strait, which is the fastest growing choke point in the world, seems to be the least equipped to handle this increase in flow. This is known by some as the Malacca Dilemma. Rising East Asian oil demand coinciding with rising American oil supply is the cause. Limited space and increased traffic will most likely cause many problems, including robbery and piracy, that will ultimately raise global oil prices. Because of this, Southeast Asian nations continue to ramp up their defensive spending in the area. In fact, overall defense spending in the area grew 42% between 2002 and 2011. To compensate for inevitable future growth, choke points will have to expand. To solve the Malacca Dilemma, two main ideas have been tossed around. The first proposal was the Craw Pipeline. This 193-mile pipeline across the Isthmus of Craw would accommodate for 20% of current production. Considering the difficulty of the project, the high costs involved, and environmental concerns, the probability of this pipeline project carrying through is slim. The Thai Canal was proposed sometime later as an alternative option. The canal would shorten trips by 2,500 to 3,500 kilometers. It seems a little more economically viable, but still not very cost efficient overall. The plan is to build a large canal that would cut through southern Thailand to enable improved transportation in the area. The plan calls for construction over 10 years, employing roughly 30,000 workers and costing between 20 and 25 billion US dollars. Although we know global production will continue to rise and hopefully choke point expansion will occur, the future of these crucial choke points are still unstable due to diplomatic tensions surrounding them. The Strait of Hormuz is dependent on national stability of Iran, Oman, and the UAE. Any aggression by these countries would disrupt a large portion of the world's oil supply and economy. The Bab al-Mandeb Strait is dependent on the strength of Yemen, and despite continued efforts by America, Yemen remains relatively unstable. Any political upheaval would potentially disrupt the flow of shipments through the strait. Escalating violence in surrounding countries like Libya is an ongoing concern for the oil traveling through not only the Suez Canal, but also the Suez Pipeline. In this graphic, global oil choke points, proved oil reserves, areas with current or recent political unrest, and oil transit routes are all displayed. The lines and circles are proportional to the oil volumes they each represent. This graphic does an excellent job of showing how the future of the global oil industry is dependent on diplomatically unstable countries.
Approximately one-third of the world oil market is traded and transported through a maritime choke point. Asia and Australia receive 100% of their imported oil through at least one choke point, with the US and Europe each receiving approximately 50% of their imports through a choke point. In the US alone, the daily consumption of oil at $100 a barrel accounts for nearly $1.8 billion per day. The Strait of Hormuz, Strait of Malacca, and Suez Canal carry over 90% of maritime oil bound for Asia, Europe, and the US. These three regions also account for nearly 80% of worldwide GDP. A 100% shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz would affect 21 countries within 1 year by decreasing GDP by 1%, with the 6 largest Asian economies being affected in 3 months or less. This slowing would be further compounded by rising unemployment rates. A 200-day shutdown of Hormuz would result in 4.9 million new unemployed in India alone. While in as little as 90 days, a shutdown of Hormuz would cause 180% inflation in world oil pricing. Even the less significant Strait of Malacca being closed would cause 80% inflation rates within 90 days. The efficient flow of oil is paramount to a growing global GDP, and any disruption has far-reaching consequences to worldwide economic standing.
To conclude, the main points that we wish to convey are as follows. Oil spills have happened in the past and remain to be an area of environmental concern. If a choke point is disrupted, there are usually multiple alternative routes, but pipelines don't have the capacity to move all the oil that would normally travel through the choke point, and rerouting ships can add thousands of miles. Tankers are more vulnerable to pirate and terrorist attacks at choke points, so security is very important. Also, government actions can have drastic effects on oil shipping and should be directed towards improving it. Major choke point expansions will be able to compensate for future increases in the volume of oil transported. However, the future of some choke points are unstable as diplomatic tensions rise in those areas. The oil market is vital to the world economy as nations become more and more industrialized, and due to world commodity effects, all nations are susceptible to the effects of choke point disruptions, even those not receiving oil from the disrupted passage.
Thank you for your time. We hope you enjoyed our presentation.